My older sister was on her knees in my parents' dining room. Mascara streaked, clutching the edge of the table like it could change my answer. "You owe me at least $10 million, Leah," she cried loud enough for the whole house to hear, over the hum of the air conditioner and the backyard music from my dad's retirement barbecue. My mom stood behind her, face flushed, pointing at me with the same hand that had just been passing around brisket. "You would not have gotten anywhere without this family. Your sister is drowning in business loans and you're sitting on a fortune. You are not walking out of this house until you agree to help her." My name is Leah Morgan. I was 31 when this happened in Glendale, Arizona, and that night was the last time I ever set foot in my parents' home. As you listen, think about your own family. If your parents tried to force you to hand over your savings to a sibling, would you cave or walk out? I had to decide, in real time. Growing up in Glendale, nobody announced that Chloe was the favorite, but our whole life revolved around her. Weekends meant cheer competitions or drama rehearsals, with my dad rearranging shifts at the shipping yard to drive her, and my mom treating every new interest like some urgent mission. I was the younger kid who would figure it out. By middle school, whenever I asked for anything that cost time or money, the default answer was, "Leah, you'll manage." New cleats for soccer turned into a lecture about responsibility, while Chloe's third pair of custom dance shoes was a necessary investment in her future. At holidays, my Aunt Dolores was the only person who seemed to notice. While my parents buzzed around, my sister Dolores would catch my eye with a small apologetic look, like she saw a pattern she didn't quite know how to challenge out loud. The older we got, the more that script hardened. Teachers raved about Chloe's potential while I was the one they called reliable, which is adult code for, "We don't need to think about her." When I brought home straight A's, my parents joked that I was so low maintenance. When Chloe scraped by with a B-, they took her out for ice cream to celebrate how hard she'd worked. One night in high school, my computer science teacher pulled me aside about a weekend coding camp at Arizona State. It was relatively cheap but required rides and some coordination. When I asked my mom, she didn't look up from her phone. "Leah, you're already juggling enough. Focus on your regular classes," she said. 10 minutes later, Chloe mentioned a pricey dance intensive in Scottsdale, and suddenly there were calendars on the table and credit cards out, and the whole house shifted around her plan. I learned to tuck my own interests into quiet spaces, library computers, borrowed books, late-night tutorials with headphones in, so no one would complain. As soon as I graduated high school, I knew that if I didn't move out, my 20s would disappear under whatever Chloe wanted next. I enrolled at Glendale Community College because it was affordable and close, not because anyone sat with me to weigh options. I rented a tiny one-bedroom off West Olive Avenue where the carpet was stained and the swamp cooler rattled all summer, but the key in my hand was mine. I worked the early shift at a grocery store bakery, took classes midday, and tutored algebra in the evenings at the campus learning center. When I mentioned to my parents that rent was tight, my dad nodded and said it would teach me how the real world works. Around that same time, they posted a photo of Chloe in front of a freshly painted storefront on Glendale Avenue. The caption read, "So proud to help our girl launch her dream." They had co-signed the lease, paid for renovations, and bought her equipment so she could open a boutique salon. I tapped a heart on the post during my break and went back to piping frosting. I wish I could say I never resented my sister, but that would be a lie. I knew she'd been handed that pedestal. She didn't build it. She just never questioned why she was on it while I stood on the ground. When her first version of the salon collapsed because she ignored taxes and signed contracts without reading them, my parents quietly pulled money from a home equity line to erase the damage and help her rebrand in a better location. When my car died in the same month, and I asked if they could help with repairs, my mom suggested I try the bus for a while and think of it as an adventure. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I'd cycled through more part-time jobs than I could count: barista, hostess, dog walker, campus office assistant. Eventually, I landed a full-time job at a dispatch center in Phoenix, coordinating repair technicians for appliance companies across the valley. It wasn't glamorous, but it came with health insurance and a paycheck that finally let me stop counting every single dollar. What really hooked me at the dispatch center wasn't the money, it was the chaos on the screens in front of me. I sat in a row of cubicles watching tickets pour in, listening to customers complain while half our techs were stuck in traffic on the opposite side of town. Routes overlapped jobs were double booked, and nobody had a clear picture of who was where at any given moment. Most of my coworkers just sighed and did their best to juggle calls, but something about the inefficiency grabbed my brain. I found myself staying a few minutes late looking at route history and thinking if we just rearranged these jobs and accounted for rush hour across Glendale and Phoenix, this whole operation would make more sense. That curiosity tugged me back toward the coding interest my teacher had seen years earlier. After my shifts, I pulled up free programming tutorials, the glow of my old laptop lighting my cramped living room, while the desert heat slowly leaked out of the walls, and I tried to turn frustration into something useful. Those tutorials eventually turned into a small web app. I learned enough basic web development to build a rough prototype that took incoming work orders, estimated travel times using public data, and suggested a smarter schedule based on skills, distance, and time windows. I called it Root Nest because the name popped into my head half asleep one night and made me laugh. At first, I tested it with fake numbers, then with anonymized versions of our real routes when things were quiet. Even with clumsy code, I could see the difference: fewer back-and-forth drives, more realistic schedules, shorter days for the techs. I told exactly one person at work, my friend and coworker, Brianna. She tried it herself and told me very simply that it was good and that I should figure out how to get paid for it. Hearing that from someone who didn't owe me anything was the first time I really believed Root Nest could be more than a nerdy side project hiding on my hard drive. Brianna also pushed me to show it to someone outside our building. She dragged me to a tech meetup in downtown Phoenix one Thursday night, far from the warehouses and strip malls I was used to. That's where I met Spencer, a former operations manager who now consulted for early-stage logistics startups. I showed him Route Nest on my beat-up laptop, stumbling through a pitch, while people around us tossed around words like valuation and seed round like it was everyday language. Spencer didn't care that I was nervous. He cared that I'd lived the dispatch chaos and built something concrete to fix it. He suggested I form an LLC, help me clean up my pitch, and introduced me to the owner of a small HVAC company that was bleeding money on overtime. They agreed to try my system for a month. When their overtime dropped and customer complaints slowed down, they signed an annual contract that for me was life-changing. It was more than 3 months of my salary for work I controlled on my own terms. Over the next 3 years, my life split into 2 tracks. On one, I was still the reliable daughter, the one who remembered birthdays, brought modest gifts, and listened while my parents gushed about Chloe's branding, influencer collaborations, and big plans. On the other, I was building a small but real software business serving field service companies from Mesa to Surprise. I kept the dispatch job for stability, at first adding more clients who heard about Root Nest through word of mouth. Eventually, the numbers made the decision for me. I left the call center and moved into a tiny office above a tire shop in Glendale, with mismatched desks from classified ads and a whiteboard full of deadlines and bug lists. While my parents posted pictures of yet another redesign of Chloe's salon, this time with a juice bar counter and custom neon signs, I was learning about invoicing, quarterly taxes, and contract law. When I showed up at Sunday dinners, nothing in their questions changed. "You still at that office job?" my dad would ask. "Chloe's got an influencer coming in next week. Tell her what to post," my mom would say. At some point, I stopped trying to correct them. Every attempt to explain what I was building got folded back into conversations about Chloe's vision and Chloe's stress. Spencer warned me that if my family got involved financially, things could get tangled and ugly fast, and my gut agreed. So when a mid-sized tech firm from Austin reached out asking if I'd ever considered partnering or selling, I kept those conversations completely separate from family life. Months of demos, negotiations, and late-night calls followed. They wanted a majority stake in Root Nest, with me staying on in a director role to keep steering the product. When the final offer came in at $19.5 million for that stake structured between an upfront payment and an earnout, I stared at the email until my screen dimmed. Eventually, I signed the documents in my little office, sent copies to my attorney and to Spencer, and stepped outside into the hot Glendale evening. No balloons, no champagne, just traffic on the freeway, and the quiet realization that every late night had turned into a number that would change my entire trajectory. In the background, my parents' lives kept orbiting Chloe like always. They refinanced the house I grew up in, the beige stucco one with gravel instead of grass and a view of the desert wash behind the fence, to fund her latest expansion. More chairs, more staff. Professional marketing, a second location in Peoria. My mom sent a family group text with a picture of my dad cutting a ribbon outside the new storefront captioned, "Doing whatever it takes for our girl," I replied. "Looks great," and left it at that. I paid off my modest car loan, moved money into safer accounts, and hired a financial planner through one of Spencer's contacts to build something sustainable instead of blowing it on showy purchases. Part of me still wondered if I was being too cautious by keeping them in the dark, but that doubt didn't survive my dad's retirement party, where everything finally exploded. The day of the barbecue, their backyard looked like every major Morgan event I remembered. Canopies from the hardware store, coolers full of drinks, kids running through sprinklers on patchy grass, and my dad at the grill pretending to hate the attention while clearly enjoying it. Relatives I hadn't seen in years hugged me and told me I looked grown, which is what people say when they don't actually know anything about your life. My mom floated from group to group with her hostess smile, accepting compliments on the food and making sure everyone heard about Chloe's busy schedule and exciting plans. I stayed on the edges, refilling cups, tossing more hot dog buns on the counter, entertaining kids so their parents could sit for 5 minutes. I had promised myself I'd keep the night simple, honor my dad, avoid heavy topics, leave before anything got tense. Then I spotted Aunt Dolores watching me from across the patio, with that same searching look she'd had when I was a kid, and a quiet part of me knew this night wasn't going to stick to the script. When the heat finally shoved everyone inside, we squeezed around the long dining table and a folding card table my dad dragged in from the garage. Food ran down the center in bowls and platters: ribs, potato salad, tortillas, grilled vegetables, and conversation started with safe topics. My dad's stories from decades at the shipping yard, cousins talking about schools and gas prices. Then my mom did what she always did and steered the spotlight. "Chloe, tell everyone about the membership program at the studio," she said. My sister launched into a polished rundown about subscription packages, influencer partnerships, and dreams of a location closer to Scottsdale, conveniently skipping the vendors chasing her for late payments. Everyone murmured admiration. I was half listening, half chewing, when Dolores gently cleared her throat. "Leah," she said, in a tone that cut through the noise without being loud. "Last time we talked, you mentioned some kind of software for service companies. How's that going?" The room didn't go silent, but it shifted. Suddenly, people were actually looking at me. My mom blinked like she had just remembered I existed. "Oh, right, your little app," she said. "You still doing that?" Years of habit made me want to shrug and deflect, but I was suddenly tired of acting like my life was tiny so everyone else could stay comfortable. I set my fork down and answered Dolores instead of my mother. "It's going really well," I said. "A firm in Austin bought a majority stake a few months ago. I stayed on as director of product." Someone near the end of the table asked what that meant in real numbers, and before I could overthink it, I heard myself say, "The deal was for $19.5 million. The words came out strangely calm. Conversations stalled. Someone paused mid-pour with iced tea. My dad's eyes narrowed the way they did when he suspected someone at work was holding back information. For one beat, nobody knew which role to put me back into. The first reaction wasn't pride. It was disbelief that something that big could have happened without their knowledge. Chloe let out a short, sharp laugh. "You mean 19,000, right?" she said. When I shook my head, her expression slipped from amusement into full panic as she tried to reconcile this with the family script where she was the ambitious one and I was just steady. My mom's face hardened. "You're telling us you came into that kind of money and didn't think to tell your own parents," she demanded. "We have broken our backs for this family, helped you girls over and over, and you're just sitting on it." My dad stayed quiet, but the look he gave me wasn't pride. It was calculation, like he was already rearranging our lives in his head. Chloe burst in before I could answer. "Do you have any idea how much debt I'm under?" she cried. "Product orders, marketing leases on both locations, Mom and Dad put their house on the line for me. And you just watched while you stash millions." Her chair scraped as she stood and then dropped to her knees beside it, hands gripping the edge of the table. "I need at least $10 million to clear everything and relaunch properly," she pleaded. "You owe me that, Leah. You owe this family." What cut deepest wasn't that she asked. It was how fast my mom backed her like this had been settled years ago, and I just hadn't gotten the memo. "Your sister is right," my mom said, standing to, one hand on Chloe's shoulder. "We have poured everything into raising you girls. If you have that kind of money, it is only fair that you help. Your sister's business benefits all of us. Think of your father's retirement, our medical bills, everything we've done for you. Keeping it all to yourself is selfish." A few relatives shifted in their chairs, clearly uncomfortable, but nobody stepped in. My dad finally spoke, voice measured. "We're not saying you have to give everything," he said, "but we should sit down and look at numbers. Maybe put your name on the house so it's protected. Combine what you've built with what we've built." To them, it sounded like reasonable planning. To me, it sounded like they were trying to lash my life raft to a sinking ship. My pulse pounded, but my voice stayed level. "I'm not giving you $10 million, I said to Chloe. "I'm not giving you any amount to fix choices you made without me. And I'm not putting my name on a house that's tied to your business." I looked at my parents. "You decided to refinance. You decided to sign those leases." "I didn't. I'm willing to cover the cost of this party for Dad. But that's it." My mom's expression twisted. "You have turned into someone I don't recognize," she snapped. "We did everything for you, and you can't even help your own sister Chloe." Sobbed louder, insisting I was ruining her life and that I'd owe karma for this. A cousin tried to change the subject. Aunt Dolores suggested everyone calm down and talk later, but my mom raised her voice over both, saying there was nothing to think about because the moral answer was obvious. That was my cue. I told my dad I hoped he enjoyed retirement, walked out, and drove home shaking. For a few days afterward, I told myself that had been the peak of the drama, that as ugly as it was still just shouting. I ignored my mom's voicemails about how I had humiliated them and Chloe's texts claiming I had betrayed the family. I buried myself in work with the Austin team in feature planning and one-on-ones with Brianna, pretending the barbecue was just another bad family memory. Then my bank called on a Thursday morning. The representative politely asked if I had authorized several large transfers from my accounts over the weekend, each for hundreds of thousands of dollars each, to a newly added recipient. When I said absolutely not, she explained that the transfers had been blocked as suspicious, but whoever initiated them had answered several of my security questions correctly. High school mascot, childhood pet, street I grew up on. She also mentioned an attempted password reset using a recovery email tied to my parents' address. I didn't need a detective to see what that meant. I sat at my kitchen counter with my phone still in my hand, staring at the wall. I'd been careful with passwords and devices. I hadn't logged into banking apps on public Wi-Fi, hadn't written login details down at work, hadn't shared them with anyone. The only people who knew those specific details lived under the roof where I'd just been called selfish for not handing over my money. It didn't feel like a new wound. It felt like confirmation of what my gut had been whispering for years. They didn't just feel entitled to ask, they felt entitled to take. I emailed Monica Rivera, a local attorney Spencer had recommended when we first started talking about selling the company, and asked whether she could see me as soon as possible. She fit me in the next day. Sitting across from Monica in her office in Central Phoenix, I laid out my life in order for the first time: childhood favoritism, the way my parents financed Chloe's salon, my decision to keep Route Nest quiet, the sale, the explosion at the retirement party, and now the attempted transfers. Monica listened without interrupting, then said there were two realities we had to work with: emotional and legal. They overlap, she said, but we're going to focus on what we can prove. She brought in a financial analyst she trusted, a calm, detail-obsessed man named Jamal Patterson. He asked for whatever documentation I had: screenshots of the bank's alerts texts about money, my student loan statements, business formation papers, and anything public about my parents refinancing their house or Chloe's expansions. Then he asked the question that cut through the guilt I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. Has your family ever contributed money or assets to your company in any form? When I told him no, that they barely understood what I did, he nodded like a puzzle piece had finally clicked. Over the next weeks, Jamal turned messy numbers into a clean timeline. On one side, he charted my parents' and Chloe's finances, the home equity line used to fund the salons, credit cards opened around launch dates, late payments to contractors and landlords, new loans layered on top of old ones. On the other side, he laid out my Path Community College tuition. I paid myself rent covered by bakery and dispatch wages, the modest savings that went into Root Nest's first server's client contracts, and finally, the acquisition funds from Austin. There was no overlap, no hidden loan, no investment, nothing that made my company part of the family business. Meanwhile, Monica worked with my bank's fraud department to obtain device logs for the attempted transfers. IP addresses pointed back to my parents' house and to a tablet I recognized from its generic label. Recovery emails matched an address my sister had set up for family stuff. It wasn't ambiguous. The pattern was undeniable. Once Monica was satisfied with the evidence, she shifted gears. She drafted formal letters to my parents and to Chloe, outlining the unauthorized transfer attempts, the forensic data tying them to their devices and contact information, and the legal consequences if anything like that happened again. The letters were calm but blunt. Any further interference with my accounts would lead to immediate criminal complaints and civil claims. She also told me to overhaul my security: new passwords, multi-factor authentication with a physical key, security questions that had nothing to do with my real life, and complete removal of any contact information tied to my parents' address. When the letters landed, the tone from my family flipped. The messages about how selfish I was turned into outrage, that I was dragging lawyers into a family misunderstanding, that I was making us look like criminals, that this was all a huge overreaction. My dad sent a carefully worded text claiming they had only been trying to move funds into a safe account for the family, as if intent erased the fact that they had tried to slip into my accounts behind my back. The ripple effects didn't stop with hurt feelings. My bank obligated to track potential fraud flagged related accounts and credit lines tied to my parents' address. The home equity line they had used repeatedly for Chloe's expansions came under review. When they tried to bump it up again to cover a slow stretch at the studio, the bank declined, citing concerns about recent activity. Around the same time, a contractor Chloe had been stringing along finally filed a complaint over unpaid invoices, and their attorney started pulling records. The house of cards became obvious: multiple lines of credit, late payments, bounced checks covered just long enough to open something new. The landlord for the Peoria location, tired of excuses, chose not to renew her lease. Within months, the second studio closed, the signage came down, and Chloe's social media shifted from grand opening reels to vague posts about taking time to reset. In the extended family, my parents tried to spin the situation as their ungrateful daughter attacking them, but as details leaked out, some relatives quietly backed away from their drama rather than rallying behind them. While their finances tightened, my life moved in the opposite direction, not in some flashy overnight success montage, but in steady, ordinary steps. I left my aging apartment for a modest condo in a newer Glendale complex with decent insulation and a small balcony where I could drink coffee before the heat got brutal. I furnished it slowly with things I actually liked paying cash and refusing to take on new debt. At work, my role with the Austin firm expanded. I led a small team refining Root Nest and consulted on other logistics tools they were building. I carved out time each week to mentor interns from local community colleges, kids who reminded me of the version of myself who never got to go to that coding camp. Brianna stayed by my side professionally and personally, and we developed the kind of friendship where we could joke about my family without minimizing how painful it had been. When she said one day, half laughing, "Honestly, your parents underestimating you is the best thing that ever happened to me, because otherwise I might not have this job." We both understood exactly what she meant. Cutting my family off wasn't one big explosion. It was closing doors one by one and refusing to reopen them. I stopped answering my mom's calls after realizing every conversation turned into either guilt or rage. I blocked Chloe after she sent a long message blaming me for the studio closing and accusing me of weaponizing lawyers instead of helping like a real sister. Group chats with cousins that had once been memes and baby pictures became minefields of secondhand updates and pressure to hear them out. So I muted and eventually left those too. The final line came the day my parents showed up unannounced at my condo complex, yelling into the call box that they weren't leaving until I came down. My chest tightened, but I called the front desk and told them not to grant access. I watched from my living room window as the security guard spoke with them and then walked them back to their car. It was surreal and sad, but it was also the safest I had ever felt with them on the other side of the gate. With distance, a different kind of clarity settled in. Therapy helped me untangle the story I'd grown up with, that my needs were small, that it was noble for me to accept less. So my sister could have more, that any success I had was a fluke I owed back to my parents, and replace it with something closer to reality. My independence wasn't a punishment. It was a strength I built because I had no safety net. Chloe's entitlement didn't appear out of nowhere. My parents fed it every time they erased the consequences of her choices. And my parents, for all their talk about sacrifice, showed me exactly where their line was when they chose to try to reach into my accounts rather than figure out how to be proud of me. Understanding that didn't make what they did okay, and it didn't produce forgiveness, but it did strip away the last hopeful thought that if I just explained myself better, they would finally treat me fairly. People sometimes ask whether I regret keeping the sale of Root Nest a secret, whether I think things would have turned out better if I had told my family sooner. I don't. If anything, the retirement party and the bank alerts showed me I had underestimated how far they were willing to go. The moment someone uses your childhood memories as keys to try to break into your accounts, they're telling you your value to them is measured in dollars, not in who you are. The moment a parent stands beside your sobbing sister and demands 8 figures from you in the name of family, they're telling you love is conditional on what you hand over. Once I finally accepted that there wasn't any middle ground left that felt safe, I could keep letting them rewrite my life into their story, or I could write my own story without them, and I chose the second option with no plans to look back. So that's what I've done. Today my life isn't perfect or cinematic, but it is mine. I wake up in a home I chose, do work that actually matters to me, and share my time with people who care, whether I'm okay, not whether I am convenient or profitable. I send Aunt Dolores a card every holiday, thanking her in small ways for being the one person who ever truly saw me in that house. As for my parents and Chloe, I haven't spoken to them in years. I don't stalk their social media. I don't drive by the old house. I don't ask cousins for updates. If they ever decide to change, that's their business, but I won't be there to watch it. If you take anything from my story, let it be this family does not mean you owe someone access to your bank account, your business, or your peace. Boundaries are not cruelty. They're how you protect what you built when nobody thought you would build anything at all. Thanks for listening. If this had been your family at that table, what would you have done?